Hey everyone, this is going to be a special episode of the podcast from a conversation I hosted live in New York with Rishin Banker, who's the VP of Product at Maven. It's part of a new in-person series I'm hosting with Aster AI called Blurring Lines, which is really exploring how product design and engineering are coming together and how these clear swim lanes are no longer as clear as they used to be. So you're going to hear a little bit of a different kind of soundtrack introducing the episode. And I just wanted you to know, as our audience, why this episode's a little bit different. So with that said, I hope you enjoy. Say bye, Gaia.
Bye-bye.
All right, so thanks everyone for joining. This is the first in what we're calling the Blurring Lines series here in New York, bringing together product people, initially starting with what I'm most familiar with, which is product management and people that are product leaders, but really exploring the intersection of how design, engineering, and product are coming together. And I think our whole craft is kind of evolving in a new way. So there's a lot we can do online about it, and talks and lightning lessons, which I'm a big fan of what Maven's doing to help educate people with courses and stuff. But for me personally, I think I've been craving a bit more of kind of like real-time dialogue and also just like learning from other people without screens in the way, and just kind of like people learning from people and talking about stuff. So
I feel the same. I spent a lot of time learning behind a screen through Maven too, but I still really appreciate this.
yeah, so just some context. I've been teaching on Maven for coming up on 2 years, and I've mostly used the platform as an instructor. And I gotta say, I've noticed that the pace of new features and new capabilities that are being rolled out has increased. I've also had Gagan, your CEO, on my podcast, and it sounds like you guys have been really experimenting with ways of working faster, not just because of AI, but certainly powered, maybe, or fueled by some of the innovations with AI. So I'd love to kind of maybe start by hearing a bit more about like what have you guys been like experimenting with process-wise, and then what any early learnings from you on maybe ways that you've found to move faster as these kind of the old way of working is starting to fade into whatever the new way of working is starting to look like?
Yeah, it's been very exciting times, I think, for everyone. And for some context, I think a lot of people in the room are familiar with Maven, but something that sometimes surprises people about Maven is we are a pretty lean and scrappy team. So we are about 25 people overall as a company. And for most of the time, I've been at Maven for about 4 years. For the first 3 or so years, our PDE team was 2 PMs, 2 designers, and about 8 engineers. Today, we are 3 PMs, 3 designers, and still 8 engineers. So the shape of it is still pretty similar and pretty lean. The biggest change has been with each of those formats. Before, we would be usually covering 2 to 3 projects at a time, and that's how we would organize, so 3 to 4 engineers per project. We are now doing 5 to 6 concurrent projects at a time, and that's primarily how we have reorganized. So smaller pods, fewer people, more decision-making within those pods, and that's probably the main idea that has led to a lot of other process shifts. But the question that we've asked ourselves is how much more can we do at the same time, given new tooling, new ways of working, and push ourselves on the extreme of that and then figure out where things maybe create some holes and patch it up as it comes along.
Yeah, so I'm hearing kind of like the ratio of PM and design to engineering has increased. So like more PM and design firepower per engineer, and then more projects running in parallel than there used to be. Are you still following what I might consider like kind of like a linear development process that starts with like a problem, idea, design, prototype, ship to production? Or have you guys made any major tweaks to like what the product development life cycle is looking like?
I think each of those steps still has to happen. I think what has changed is who is doing each of those steps, and how those steps get sequenced. I think what I'm realizing now is a relic of the past is that because if you have a person that is fully focused on, let's say, strategy and the problem phase, you have an assumption that you should always be doing X percentage of time in strategy and problem phase because that's what that person's role is. What has changed now, I think, is the idea of a bottleneck is a shifting definition where if you get a lot of clarity on the strategy and problem collectively as a company early on, you might be able to put way more firepower towards the solution prototyping building phase. And that's been, I think, the biggest change, which is I think what you've noticed over the last couple of months is we got to a lot of clarity on a defined strategy that we wanted to implement. And that enabled us to be able to define these 5 to 6 pretty clear work streams. So bundling strategy and the problem phase upfront allows you to deploy more people to go into the solution phase at once, which I think before in a more waterfall-y type of structure, you don't get into that because you're following more these defined roles and you're assuming that, okay, everyone's gonna continue some amount of strategy and problem, whereas now anyone can be a builder. So you can think of your roles as a lot more flexible and get to the same outcome a lot faster because you're flexibly changing what your role is going to be.
So hanging out for a second, like the who does what maybe part is evolving, and that's maybe enabling you guys to create more parallelized work streams towards like a more clear kind of strategy and vision. Outside of EPD, are you also seeing people kind of step into the builder role? Like, you know, you guys have some great folks on like the customer, like the operations side, the marketing side, the community side. Like, are you seeing other folks kind of stepping in?
Totally, yeah. I think that's been a really exciting way of also extending who you might think of as doing the product role within your company, especially where parts of the product role I think are having a lot of the domain context and the business goal part of it. And for sure, there are people that are not traditionally part of the EPD organization that are thinking about that. So one example, we're working on a big launch coming up in a couple of weeks, and we're redesigning a marketing page that will pull students into Maven for the first time and playing around with a lot of fun ideas as to what an interactive experience might be for that. That is entirely being vibe coded, iterated on by our marketing lead, Rachel Kai, along with RJ.
Shout out Rachel, she's awesome.
And with Joao too, as one of our designers, who's jumping in. And this traditionally, I mean, based on these prototypes are so cool, it would traditionally have been a much bigger team, looping in a lot more people, probably a slower cycle in terms of how many iterations we can play with, because you're basically carving out some percentage of different people's time. And so, yes, we have way more people that are becoming builders and beyond just product and design.
Got it. Can we go maybe, because I think this is a good kind of priming for maybe talking about some more specifics or like examples, but like, can you share anything about a project that you guys are either actively working on or something that you've recently shipped that kind of followed a different, like if that project happened 6 or 12 months ago, the people working on it would have probably been different, or the way it got done would have been different. And what did you guys do like that you might be applying to like upcoming projects, or like you're like, wow, that worked really well for this?
Yeah, I think that was, so the landing page is one example. We have another page that is the entry point for our instructors. If you're on Maven and you want to begin teaching, that is also a outward facing marketing page that is mostly front end. So it doesn't require a lot of interaction. And in the past, we would have involved a lot more people to be able to get something like that out. In this case, UN, our head of design, basically was able to own it end to end. And
including like shipping the code to production.
Including shipping the code to production, yeah. So this was a little bit of an experiment, which was, as we have been entering into this phase where more people are builders, there definitely is the question of when do you install some of the gates and checks in between, because you don't want a code base where anyone is adding anything. And so this was one of our first tests into that of, so engineer for sure is reviewing it, making some adjustments. But when you are able to basically apply the risk level of the project up front, you can also clarify how rigorously you need to be able to have more people on it. And in this case, it's a front-end only page. It doesn't really connect to any other data that we are tracking. You can apply a relatively low risk to experiment and keep it in its own container within our code base. So even if it's not the way that an engineer might have built it entirely, the benefit of having someone else be able to create it and kind of operate in its own space with reviews, but still the ownership is clear, is very much worth it. And I think there are a lot of examples that will feed into that are, this is a type of project that is able to live in its own space so that you can actually have someone else be the owner of it. I still asking for reviews, but I think when you get to ones that there's certain projects that are more complex, that the ownership starts to butt up against each other and no one wants to be handed off ownership in something that they weren't a part of building. So maybe those are some other examples that we can talk about that are more difficult. But in this case, this was a clean and quick example because that ownership could be really clear.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, when we had Gagan on my podcast, he talked about how Yuan, I think she basically made the case that you guys need to spend a few months kind of re-architecting your design system, or we didn't get into the specifics of what it was, but like kind of like the infrastructure that allows what you just described to perhaps happen.
Yes.
Is that right? That it took you guys maybe like 3 to 4 months of doing some almost like foundational work that enabled someone like a designer to go to ship a end-to-end feature? And what was like the core of that phase?
Yeah, so we had not been using that much of a design system for the last couple of years. So there was definitely some catch up that we had wanted to do, even just to improve our build velocity and design velocity. One of the realizations has actually been that a lot of the process improvements that help you faster in this new world are very similar improvements that also would have helped you move faster in the old world. It's just even clearer. For example, clean code where you have really clear internal APIs. Agents love that because it makes the documentation really clear. Design systems is another example of that, where if you are structured in how you have your components set up, then that not only makes an individual designer's job easier, but it very much makes an agent's ability to be able to prototype and pick from those tools a lot more easily. So some of that is building more of a documentation-heavy culture that enables both new team members, but also the new agent types of team members that has that I think we were doing a little bit of catch-up. So that has definitely sped us up a lot in the last.
So now, just to understand the implications of that kind of like, call it multi-month build out or formalization, or what's the term? Foundation laying, let's say. So if I come into the team now and I have an idea and I have full access to the repo, I have all the permissions, all the tools, and I have an idea, are things built in a way that, any member of the team can start to put together a prototype for a new web, like a new landing page or a new course page, or like basically any part of the product, and it will just be done in a way that kind of adheres to your existing brand, language, design system. So you've put a lot of guardrails in place to kind of ensure nothing can kind of get really built, or at least make its way to production without falling into those constraints.
Exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
and it's some combination of cleaning the code base itself to reflect whatever our latest design system is, but then also having a file that is very clear that we can point to of these are the components to pull from. And so every one of our prototypes begins with that, and everything feels a lot more realistic more quickly, and that gets much more realistic feedback in our internal reviews. We can show things to instructors or students a lot more quickly. And this is noticeably different. I think for anyone that's been playing around with tools over the last couple of years, it's fun to take the same problem to the same tools and see how differently it is solving, how much better certain parts of it are. And I would say the lovable bolts phase, where we were making a lot of vibe-coded prototypes, I mean, we did a lot of that at Maven too. It definitely served its purpose. It also allowed for faster development of new ideas. It is still a night and day difference, I think, versus where we are now, which is using the real code base, real components, and the level of realism and how quickly you can get there really skips a lot of steps. And gets you much more reliable feedback more quickly.
What's your go-to? Are you in Cursor or are you Claude Code in the terminal?
Like Claude Code and Cursor is
Code and
becoming
Cursor?
my go-to
That's
now.
me too. The Claude Code plugin, and I also have the Codex plugin in Cursor, and I just love working within the IDE. I don't know why some people don't. I just love having the browser loaded natively, and then sometimes if I need to do something in the browser agentically, you could also use the Cursor agent, and the Cursor agent can fully control the browser. I don't know. It's just like it's a really fun time as a product person who is historically like every idea you have has to go through like the process, it goes in the backlog, you talk about it with people, and maybe that sounds like a dinosaur now, but
Yeah.
that feels like forever ago.
It really does. Yeah, it has changed even my guttural feelings of things where we were because of the way that we've been so lean, and as a marketplace, Ben has been on the other end of this. Your influence is much greater than your team size itself. So you have a lot of instructors, a lot of students, a lot of requests that are coming in. So it has always felt a challenging prioritization challenge of picking what we could do and the couple things that we could really make those 2 to 3 concurrent bets at once. And now you definitely feel a different level of impatience, and you want to shift a lot of the time that would have spent towards heavily debating and making arguments on small scope adjustments towards just doing the thing, or pushing more towards like how can you as a PM even push more towards building the thing as opposed to hyper optimizing the micro prioritization decision between a couple smaller items.
Yeah, makes total sense. So one quick question on the design thing, and then I want to talk about more of like how the people side of all this is playing out internally, and just like how, because change can be hard, like culturally, especially when people's identities can be tied up in a certain role. Like I'm a designer, I do this. I'm an engineer, I do this, right? But last question on the design side for a sec is, do you still start new explorations for projects in Figma? Because I recently I participated in some of your user research, and I think it was like a full clickable like web prototype. I don't think it was made in Figma, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, can you just comment on like how Figma still fits into your process?
We're still figuring it out. As part of the shift, we somewhat intentionally decided to let's push the extremes. So we are mostly starting from Cloud or Cursor prototyping. And what we are finding is that although those are helpful to get a realistic signal, it has actually been less helpful than we would have expected in expediting the path from prototype to production, because those prototypes are so far from being build ready, and they lack some of the important parts that Figma provides, which is the detail level spec. That we have had some situations where we're still starting in the more clickable prototype because you can get to better feedback more quickly. But then if it is something that is more net new or polish is more important, then we'll create something that is in Figma before an engineer starts to build. Sometimes we'll still skip that step though, and then the engineer is just making more micro design decisions from the clickable prototype, and then there's just live huddling or reviews, which is a nice step that skips the Figma piece, but I don't think Figma is fully going away yet.
Are less people spending time in Figma at the company?
I think it is a reduction, yes, because basically the time that we are now shifting towards the live prototypes is coming away from what otherwise would have been Figma. Clicking around to make all the interactions work within Figma is much slower.
And if someone puts together a prototype and they want to get feedback from the team, in Figma historically, that would mean like someone could come and like leave comments directly on the Figma canvas or something like that. Like, do you guys have a good workflow for someone being able to get feedback on a prototype? Is it record a loom and just like what's the mechanism?
We're still doing looms, yeah. So a lot of feedback comments come through looms and Slack threads. The pixel level comments is where Figma is still useful too. I don't think we found a great way to exactly replicate that in the live prototypes. But that's another example of, is it worth having a comment review process on that, or should we just build a thing as close as possible, and then make adjustments.
I think it depends on what kind of feedback is necessary for the prototype at that stage in time, right? Like, the best design reviews I've participated in as a PM, where the designer comes in historically, have always been like, here's exactly the kind of feedback that's going to be most helpful at this point in time. So if someone comes in with like, nitpicky UI implementation details, but they're really looking for more like, how do we feel directionally about like, is this solving the problem the right way? Or if engineering can be like, hey, are there any like architectural impediments to being able to execute this solution? So I think it really just depends. Like, I'd say if you guys are trying to just like align on like the shape of the solution at a high level, then doing that as a Figma comment probably is less useful. And I love when designers will put together a loom of a direction they're exploring, drop it in Slack or in some channel, and then people can just reply in a comment and replies to the thread with like specifically addressing the exact kind of feedback that the designer, or in this case the builder, is looking for.
Yeah, Loom is definitely still helpful for that. I will say, I think we've had more threads where people are sharing branches or prototype links, and now I wasn't thinking about that at coming into this, but I think you are right that is something that is a little lost, or it is more difficult when it's unable to pick the specific context. We've partly replaced that with more review, or a different kind of reviews, faster and more frequent,
like
reviews
live
with more people.
reviews?
Live reviews, exactly. Yeah, where in other process changes, we've cut a lot of our standing meetings and just had this expectation that the smaller pods will be huddling more. So people's calendars look clearer, but in reality, people are actually spending way more time with other people than they were before, which us being an early startup as remote has always been a challenge of how do you recreate that in-person tapping someone on the shoulder feel. And I think we are getting a lot closer to it, partly by having fewer people that are more responsible for parts. But we also used to have a product design review that was set time, weekly, limited number of slots. That was an important time for Gagan, our founder CEO, to give a lot of input. And we've totally broken that up too, where instead of that being a single slot that happens, I mean, his time is definitely still one of the bottlenecks. So we have kind of this more flexible office hours slot for him that happens almost daily. And there's an expectation that every week someone is going to be grabbing his time. So you have quicker reviews based on wherever you are at, and there's an expectation across everyone that you will make your time for more based on when something is ready, as opposed to waiting for when the standing meeting was set before.
It's kind of like an artificial scarcity of CEO level attention to say like, this only happens like one time a week at this time. It's actually something we had Nikki Skarstad from Duolingo on our podcast, and she talked about how the CEO of Duolingo they still do daily design reviews, product reviews at Duolingo.
And they have a 5-minute, I think I was watching it, they have a 5-minute version and a 15-minute version.
Yeah, I mean, there's still like preparation that goes in, like it's not a bunch of slop, right? But the mechanism for getting like Duolingo's leadership level taste and intuition and product sense, let's say, kind of like dispersed throughout the organization, still happens. Like the primary mechanism through that happens is these daily product reviews. And you are expected to kind of like, if you're trying to learn the company culture, like you could join, you're a new PM or a new designer, and you could like see the kind of feedback that comes in there. But she said that that's way better than, she's worked at Airbnb and Etsy, like other companies that have great design culture too. And she said this is probably the one that's like leveled up her, kind of design intuition in a lot of ways by having more regular touch points. And when you can move really fast, like why wait a week? A week feels like a really long time right now to like to wait to get feedback on something. Which brings me kind of maybe to like where I want to go next, which is change management and people. As PMs have been able to build more, designers have been able to build more, engineers have been able to design and PM more. I have heard some, like PMs are basically the people I hear complaining the least right now. I think PMs are really happy. PMs they're less blocked by people. They have the tools to kind of come prepared with more stuff to show and get feedback on. Great time to be a builder, I think, for a PM. Designers, I think, are really excited. They can, especially like the best designers that I know are really excited right now because they can build their ideas, they can prototype, they're less blocked by engineers. They can just like go into their design cave and get way more done. And they're not blocked by a PM writing a spec for them or a PRD. They can do all that stuff on their own if they see a problem and want to solve it and get alignment around it. Engineers are really interesting right now. There's some engineers I know that companies that feel like they've dramatically increased the amount of time they spend reviewing PRs because now that everyone can like ship PRs, I'm not saying it's all slop, but there's just like an increase in the overall number of lines of code that are being, kind of committed to the code base at the moment. And then some of them are really excited by that. Some of them feel like they have a lot more time to build and they have better tools to build. So I'm just curious, like that's a very long way of asking my question, which is, what are you observing on kind of like the change management side, how people are reacting to this new way of working, without, divulging confidentiality? Have there been any tensions or things that kind of like have been needed to get resolved?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think there is a natural cycle that I've observed in other companies, especially startups too, where you start from this team first collaborative model, and PMs are usually often at the center of thinking about the context engineering within your team. You're all working together towards that goal. There's the defined roles. The most extreme other push, I think, is completely unbundling the team, and everyone is a builder in a silo, and seeing how far you can push that, and only bring in the team and the collaboration points at the parts that are necessary, which happens to be closer towards the end when you're shipping things into production. And I think a real con to that approach is it, like we were mentioning earlier, it creates this handoff moment to the person that ultimately might be responsible for performance or security or the system architecture, in a way where that person has not really been brought along or been a part of the project before, is a bit of a crummy situation. And I think that actually does lead to worse outcomes if you don't get some of that input upfront or along the way. So I'm still in the camp of teams and collaboration matters upfront. I think that the adjustment is still, you can be in smaller teams, and the way that you divide between the team might look different. But I think that the tension that I have seen so far comes from unexpected handoffs that maybe are also at differing levels of excitement and urgency. So it's, if one person in the corner has been thinking and getting really close to wanting to ship something, and it feels like you are so close to being able to get there, but in reality, there's a lot of steps that maybe if you have a specialist designer, a specialist engineer, especially applying their lens, it's not as close. And if they're in a silo building their own thing, it feels like it's a little bit more of competing priorities. So that, I think, has been a thing to navigate, which is still trying to identify upfront who is the right team to involve. And even though everyone can still be a builder, that doesn't mean that everyone should be building everything. And I think finding a way to play to each person's strengths and get the benefit of different ways of thinking too, where I think there's some examples where it makes sense for a designer and that the more creative way of thinking to be the lead and primary responsible owner of something. And there are other ways where you might want someone that is more of a system architect to be the primary lead on a certain project. So I think that the tensions have come about from, I think, unexpected handoffs, and also maybe a misappropriated staffing in terms of who the lead is and who some of the other contributors are.
Yeah, it seems to me like maybe the more a given project is like using existing Lego blocks, moving things around on a page, reorganizing maybe the UI or the information architecture, but not necessarily creating new, endpoints or messing with authentication and like more sensitive things. Maybe there's more like wiggle room to kind of let people try stuff. But if something is kind of pushing, if there's like a security concern or something that comes up, then, you know, being more mindful of how do you get the team to know when that's the case is important. Predictions are really challenging, but if you were to kind of like take any of the early learnings over the last 12 months, and maybe extrapolate them a little into 6 to 12 months in the future, are there any things that you think you guys are doing right now to get product out the door, to like build, research, design, validate, that you think will not will like most likely not be happening in 6 months, like things that you feel like are on the way out?
Things that we are doing today
Yeah,
still?
like
'Cause we have changed a lot
rituals or
today versus before. And I believe it is in the direction of where I expect more teams to be in 6 to 12 months. But the one question I think I have in terms of how well we will be able to scale, especially as we have we're expanding our product surface area quite a bit, is we're in this sprint right now, a pretty defined sprint of stemming from a clear basic company-wide strategy and finding ways to divide 6 work streams that feed into that single strategy. And it's really exhilarating, and it's really connective and allows for people to make easy decisions within those work streams. But also it's anchored on something that has to be really clear up front, and how much that can continue as a steady state versus allowing more independent autonomous units that relate to different parts of the product surface area. I expect we'll go into ebbs and flows with that, where for example, it's in some ways it's kind of top down and bottoms up way of figuring out what we would be prioritizing and how. And I think there's a lot of benefits that come from the two of those meeting together. Right now, we are in a more defined, we're sprinting towards a clear thing, which I think has a lot of benefits. But you also will want to have other periods where people are able to groom and improve the areas that they're in, which may be less defined and would look like a different process.
We can open up for Q&A maybe like a few minutes, but as we kind of like start wrapping up the discussion part, I'm curious if someone's in the audience or, you know, watching this and they're a product leader who's overseeing, you know, a product team or EPD or something like that, and they work directly with their CEO, founder, like you have with Gagan. Do you have any advice or any learnings for how to kind of like manage up / bring your CEO along in the current kind of phase that we're in, where, you know, the CEOs probably talk to a bunch of other CEOs, VCs. There's a lot of stuff floating around in the zeitgeist about what other companies are doing, but in reality, every CEO has to go back to their own company and figure out what the reality is on the ground in their team and what's possible and not possible. So any advice you have for product leaders that are trying to really kind of like strengthen that partnership with the CEO right now and kind of make sure they're informed?
Yeah, everyone is more ambitious than they ever have been before. I think that happens at the org level. I feel it as a PM myself, and for sure CEOs I think feel it the most, because I think a lot of companies feel like they are driven by a culture that can be set by a push towards leaning more into it versus leaning less into it. And so I think what has helped is for sure the office hours, regular touch points, where Gagan is able to see much more regularly, week to week, or even day to day, what the progress is. We also have a Friday demos. I think a lot of companies have this, which it's the favorite meeting of the week, where you really see viscerally week to week how much things are changing. So we also leave some flex room in that to ask about what has changed in the way that you built this today versus how you might have built a couple. Is
that like a show
ago,
and tell kind of ritual where like anyone in the team can come and like just demo to the team what like the whole company is there?
Yeah, and we're small enough that pretty much everyone presents something
Cool.
too. So it's an awesome way also for the engineers to see, how our marketing plan is changing. And often those are AI demos. It's pretty much always a AI demo showcase at Maven every week, which is really fun. And through that, I think you can start to spot if there's some process improvement that could be happening behind. So yeah, I think trying to be as transparent about the work and the progress of the work.
What I love about that is that it seems like it's less about kind of like people talking in the abstract about like what the process is, and it's more like just showing, like lots of showing and
Yes.
creating the osmosis that allows people to I mean, smart people don't need to be hit over the head with something. Like, it's like you just show them what's going on, and they will come to their own conclusions and like what it means and what's possible. And so that's yeah, we used to have at my last full-time job, there's also like a small 15-person Series A company, but we used to have this ritual on Thursdays, pre-AI to some degree. I mean, AI was just kind of taken off, but it was our show and tell, and everyone would like get together and just like show what they're working on. And even though it wasn't, this is what AI allowed me to do, is still like helping everyone kind of see what's going on. So building that ambient awareness of what's going on. Before we open it up for audience Q&A, by the way, if you have questions, you can come and post up on that chair right there. Please try to keep questions, short, so we can get through more people. But do you have any final kind of like learnings or takeaways or things that are actively on your mind right now that feel kind of particularly relevant to people thinking about how these roles are evolving and blurring?
I think my lasting thoughts are still that it's incredibly exhilarating to be more of a builder. I think everyone can feel that, especially as a PM, and at the same time, it's also incredibly rewarding and productive to collaborate. So those are two of the tensions that I think I've been grappling with, of how much to push in the silo building versus the still getting the most out of your team. And there's something great still about the original way of product development, where you have people of very different ways of thinking, and you're being able to apply those different ways of thinking towards creating an even better output. And yeah, so I think the push is still to keep what's working great out of that while moving faster.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Mark a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.